What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today it's time to learn how to play Riftbound. I've told you on this channel, I am very excited for Riftbound, the upcoming League of Legends trading card game. Well, now we know the rules, so it's time we had a little bit of a learn to play. Sounds like a plan? Excellent. So starting off then, how you win in Riftbound is a little bit unusual. It is not destroying all of your opponent's units or anything like that. It is getting to 8 points. When you take a battlefield, that is to say become the only person with units there, you gain a point. And if you keep your battlefield till starting your next turn, you will get yourself a point. Lovely. There is one exception, and that is if you take a battlefield, that cannot give you your final point. That has to essentially be by holding. Now, in terms of deck building, you build your deck around a champion legend. Let's use Jinx as an example. Apparently, everybody uses Jinx. This is your champion legend. It is not part of your main deck, and this will essentially determine what you're allowed to use when you are building your deck. In addition to your champion legend, you also have your chosen champion, which starts the game face up, and it has to share a name with your champion legend. But it can be any version of them. So if we take Jinx as an example, once you've got Jinx as your champion legend, you could go for Jinx Rebel or Jinx Demolitionist as your chosen champion, as long as it is Jinx. And you can have 3 copies of that in your deck, like you can have 3 copies of any card. But one of them actually starts the game face up in the champion zone, which I think is going to be a bit of an advantage. Choose your champion carefully. You then have a 40 card deck, one of which will be your chosen champion that starts the game face up. And then 3 maximum signature cards that has to match your legend. So for Jinx, for example, you could have 3 copies of Super Mega Death Rocket, but you can only have 3 total signature spells in your deck, and if you're not playing Jinx, you're not allowed to play Super Mega Death Rocket. That is a card which is only for Jinx decks. Now, in terms of cards, we obviously have units. Here's a handy graphic from the Learn to Play document, which shows the different parts of Jinx Rebel. We got your energy, your power, card type and tags, card name, card abilities, and might, which is your combat strength. This is essentially your power and your hit points, all rolled into one number. Now, the energy cost here is very important because you have your runes, and runes are what you use to essentially pay for cards. At the beginning of your turn, you get 2 runes out, although the player going last on their first turn will actually get an extra rune on turn 1. And when your runes are played, they can be different types of runes. So if we have a look at Jinx Rebel here, you've got to pay 5 in order to play this. That is to say, exhaust 5 runes. But you also have to recycle the power cost, which means you take one of the appropriate symbol, and you've got to recycle, and in Riftbound, recycle means put to the bottom of your deck. There may be no symbols, there may be more than one symbol, but you have to recycle 1 rune, put to the bottom of your deck, for every cost of power here. So your energy exhaust is the number of runes you must exhaust, turn sideways, in order to play a card. But your power recycle is the amount of runes and the type of rune that you must recycle bottom deck in order to play a card. Obviously, exhausting can be any kind of rune. So here, for instance, you would have to recycle a Chaos rune while also exhausting 5 runes. Couple important points. Yes, you can exhaust a rune and then recycle an exhausted rune. That does make it a bit easier. It means a 5 cost is a 5 cost, not a 6 cost. You exhaust 5, then you lose one of your exhausted ones. And when building your rune deck, you've got 12 cards, and essentially you can play any type and number of runes you like, but you're getting them out of your deck randomly, which means if you don't play enough of a certain type of rune, you might not see it. You have been warned. You might not see it at the right time. Might be more accurate. Now, we've also got spells. Spells are cards that you play, and they go to your trash. and jobs are good 'un. So an example of this might be Disintegrate, for instance. And Disintegrate's got an action, play it on your turn or in showdowns, you deal 3 to a unit at a battlefield, and if it kills the unit, draw 1. Yeah, we use the word kill to get rid of units in Riftbound. Coming from other card games, that is going to take some getting used to. In most card games, that is not a word we're allowed to use. But in Riftbound, that is the appropriate terminology. We then have gear, which essentially go to your base and sit there and do stuff. Like Pack of Wonders, for instance, that you can exhaust, turn sideways, and you return another friendly gear, unit, or hidden card to your owner's hand. Essentially, it lets you get something back to hand that you'd rather have in your hand for various reasons. But it sits in your base and chills. The other type of card we have here are battlefields. And essentially, every player will have one battlefield down. That is not the case in a 4-player game. In a 4-player game, the player who goes first actually loses their battlefield, so they'll only be 3 there total. But the battlefield is how you win the game. If you move a unit to an unoccupied battlefield, you gain a point. If you are sitting there on a battlefield at the beginning of your turn, you're holding it, you gain a point. And if you move to an occupied battlefield, take out all your opponent's units such that it's now your battlefield, you gain a point. Remember, taking over a battlefield will not get you the final point. You draw a card instead. You need to be essentially holding in order to get that final point and go and win the game. And there's different kinds of battlefields. So there's 3 we've been shown so far. We've got Altar to Unity. When you hold, you can play a 1 might recruit unit token in your base. You get a token unit, sounds good to me. We've got Windswept Hillock. Units here have Ganking. That is a skill that lets you move battlefield to battlefield. We'll see more on that in a moment. And then Zorn Warren's here. When you conquer, discard a card and then draw a card. So which battlefield you choose is going to hopefully match your deck, and you'll have a battlefield and your opponent will have a battlefield, and then there are skills. It's not just taking over blank battlefields. Which battlefields you have will make a little bit of a difference. So here's what a game looks like vaguely when it is set up. You will have yourself your various places on the board. You've got your rune deck, that is separate from your main deck. That is where all of your runes come from, 2 per turn. You got your champion legend and your chosen champion. You've then got your main deck, where you draw cards from. Your trash, where you put cards to when they've been used. And you've got your base here. Basically, your base is where everything goes that isn't at a battlefield. Simple as that. You can play a unit to your base, or you can play a unit to a battlefield that you control. But if you're not playing them to a battlefield, you play them to your base. Same deal with your gear. So when you start up the game here, you have 1 battlefield per player, unless it's a 4-player game, in which case they lose theirs. The Legends and Champion go face up, and your base is where your units are that aren't on a battlefield. To start the game, you draw 4 cards, and there is an optional mulligan. You can take up to 2 of the cards in your hand, cycle them, that is to say, put them at the bottom of your deck, and then draw that many cards. So you can either put 1 or 2 down. If you put 1 down, you draw 1. If you put 2 down, you draw 2. And I've already mentioned how the last player takes an extra rune on their first turn. Well, if there's 4 players, the first player doesn't draw a card on their turn. Very important. So what can you do on your turn? Well, here's how it goes. First, we awaken. That is to say, everything gets readied, units, runes, legends, everything. Then you have your beginning phase where start of turn abilities activate. And you gain 1 point for each battlefield you are holding at that point. We then channel, play 2 runes from your rune deck. The top 2 runes, very important. Again, they might not all be the same. You got your draw phase where you draw a card. And then you've got your action phase, which is your free-form do-what-you-like phase. So you can play cards, generally from your hand, but you never know. Or obviously your chosen champion. You can use card abilities, whether that's units or gear or whatever it might be. And then you can exhaust your units to move to or from battlefields. Because, of course, you need to take over battlefields in order to win the game. If you move to an unoccupied battlefield, It's yours, you get the point, job's a good un. If it's occupied by an enemy, we end up with combat. So first we resolve when I defend abilities, then we resolve when I attack abilities. You can use any reactions you've got before spells or abilities resolve. They'll be written on the cards. And it's important to note there's only 2 players in combat at a time, even if you're playing a 3 or 4 player game. Resolving combat is a bit unusual. What you do is you add the might, that number in the top right hand corner, of all of your characters, and you distribute that as damage as you like among enemy units. All damage will be dealt simultaneously, and any unit that's got damage on equal to or more than their might will be defeated, will be killed. And if no defenders remain, you've taken over the battlefield and you score a point. If they do remain, gutted. You have been unsuccessful. And do remember that at the end of your turn, as well as activating any end of turn abilities, all your units heal to full health. It doesn't stick around the damage on units. That is very, very important. Will in theory make it slightly harder to take over battlefields, but I'm pretty sure they thought about that when designing the game. And we'll finish off with some main keyword skills in a moment, but that is the basics of the game. You play your units and your gear into your base, you take over battlefields, and when you've scored 8 points from either taking over or holding battlefields, that's it, you've won the game, job's a good un. And of course, you are building around your legend and your champion, which matches your legend and your signature spells and all of that good stuff. But how about some key skills? Well, nice and quickly, we've got Accelerate, like we see on Jinx Demolitionist. You get to enter the board ready, which is a good thing because then you can actually do stuff, whereas when you're exhausted, you kind of have to wait till the start of the next turn in order to do stuff, and no one wants to wait to do stuff. Waiting to do stuff is a little bit boring. So Jinx Demolitionist, you can pay an extra 1, and then you will enter play ready. Now, Legion is a skill we see on things like Noxus Hopeful, and it is a skill that activates if you've already played another card this turn. So Noxus Hopeful is a 2 cost, but only if it's the, second or later card you play during your turn. Now, Assault can also be seen on Jinx Demolitionist here, and it just gives you +2 might when you're attacking. Simple as that. Now, Shield we can see on Lee Sing, and Shield says that you gain +1 might while you are a defender. Job's a good un. Now, Tank can be seen on Volibear. Just to be clear, I think I'm going to go Volibear straight away. I think that's going to be my chosen deck. But you can see here we've got Tank on this champion unit, Volibear Imposing. Tank says you must be assigned combat damage first, i.e. you've got to assign enough combat damage to take out Volibear before you can start assigning combat damage elsewhere. You'll also notice Volibear's got shield 3, so that's +3 might while defending. Shield could be any number essentially. Now we got Death Knell like we see on Watchful Sentry, and Death Knell is a skill that comes in when you die. Watchful Sentry draws a card when you die. There we go. Job's a good un. Except it's not because, your unit died. We've also got Deflect. We can see this on another Volibear. Deflect 2. Opponents must pay 2 extra to choose me with a spell or ability. That symbol is any type of rune. So that is the standard symbol for any type of rune. And again, Deflect could be Deflect 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it might be. Ganking we can see on Vi here, and that just says that you can move from battlefield to battlefield without doing the whole kind of exhausting rigmarole, which sounds pretty good. Hidden we can see on, for instance, Stand United. Hidden says you can hide this card for 1 and react later paying 0. So you hide it at a battlefield, only 1 card can be hidden at a time, and then essentially you can bring that out without having to pay for it later, which sounds like a win. Reaction you can see on a card like On Guard, for instance. Reaction is you play at any time, even before spells and abilities resolve. So this is what I was saying earlier, when you can react before a spell or an ability actually resolves. And then buff you can see on Cypherus of Cloudfield. And what we've got with buff is you gain yourself, well, an extra might. But that is limited to one, so if you've already got a buff, you can't buff again. One buff. You are limited. There are a couple of others that I cannot find examples of right now, but we've got temporary, which says at the start of your turn, kill this. Vision, when you play it, look at the top card of your main deck, you may recycle it. And stun, which when an effect stuns a unit, that unit doesn't deal damage in combat this turn. And that may also be relevant to some other effects as we go. My apologies, I just could not see examples of them in the cards that have currently been revealed. So there we go. That's what you need to know. That's how to play Riftbound, and now it's over to you guys. Tell me what you think about this game. Tell me how hyped you are. Tell me who you want to be playing as when we start rolling. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi. That's where we talk about Riftbound and a whole bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, join a Discord, and all kinds of fun things. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wasi Plays.